All right. So it looks like there's 37 participants. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer DeGarmo. I am the Kids Events Coordinator for Bookworks, and I'm the host of today's event. Thank you all for joining us. We're so happy to see all of you. So for today, also I want to let you know that Bookworks has lots of events, kids and adult events, book events on our website. So please check our website regularly. It's bkwrks.com. And if you enjoy programs like this, please buy your books from Bookworks because we can't fund these events unless people are buying books. Let's see, today's event, we have Scott O'Connor. He is the Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Relevant Award winner. He's the author of A Perfect Universe and 10 Stories and the novels Half World and Untouchable. He is being joined by the artist Carol Kim. She's a Los Angeles-based artist, multimedia artist. So everyone, please welcome them. What we're asking everyone to please turn off their cameras for this event so they can completely enjoy the experience of Carol Kim's presentation and Scott O'Connor's presentation. Also make sure that you're muted. Thank you so much. And Scott, go ahead and please tell us about your book.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks everybody
Thank you, Jennifer,
for coming out. I know it's not quite the same in terms of leaving the house, maybe to come out to something like this and maybe just going to another part of your couch or your living room, but we appreciate you taking the time to come out. I'll say a little bit about the book as we get started here. Zero Zone is a novel. It takes place in 1970s Los Angeles for the most part, and also some parts of New Mexico. And it's about a fictional artist named Jess Shepard who creates mostly installations, so large scale works that people can physically enter into. And these works usually revolve around the use of space, physical space, and light, either natural light or artificial light. And her intentions are usually to focus the space and the light in a way that draws attention for the visitor to the present moment and whatever that present moment might mean to them. I think even in the book, she has a line about looking for the moment within the moment. When the book begins, she has struggled to have her work funded and seen, but has had a number of public events. And there's been a narrative around her work over the years that's developed mostly about people who've had very positive or healing experiences with her work. But as the book starts, her longtime partner is killed in a car accident. And as she's grieving and trying to navigate that grief, she creates an installation in the New Mexico desert, which is called Zero Zone. And it's an attempt to memorialize her partner and to articulate her feelings. And what happens is a few weeks after that, a small group of people finds their way to this installation in the desert, and they have this ecstatic, transformative spiritual experience. And one of the people in the group starts to turn it to his own advantage, tries to control this and direct this for his own purposes. And the group becomes something of a cult, really. And they barricade themselves inside the room for 10 days. And they refuse to leave, and there's a violent standoff with the authorities. Soon after, one of the people who was in the room, one of the members of this group, is a teenage girl who had run away from home, and she finds Jess Shepard in Los Angeles and physically attacks her for creating this place and for creating this experience that these people had. And so the book.
Pause, Scott. Spoiler alert. Don't give away too much.
I'm not. This all happens really early on. I don't feel like I'm giving it away. The book then revolves around her, this girl who has disappeared. So that's all I'll say about it, at least in terms of the plot. You're right, Carol. Sorry.
Okay, so I will toss you a few questions. So I know through all our conversations that this is a book that Scott has worked on for the last 4.5 years or so. Can you talk a little bit about what got it started? What led you to this book?
Well, like one of the things that we have talked about over the summer, I think that most projects tend to come out of previous projects, at least in some way. There's always some question or image that either I didn't deal with fully in the previous book or maybe came up late in the process. And that was very much the case with this. I was very interested in a story about an artist. I was very interested in a story about the responsibilities of an artist. Artists, including writers, create things and put them out in the world, and people have experiences with them, good, bad, indifferent. And often a lot of the conversation around those experiences tends to focus on the positive experiences. I read this book and it changed my life, or it made me feel heard, or it made me feel it comforted me in some way in a difficult time. And those are experiences I think as writers, we hope for, or as artists, we hope for. We hope people have meaningful experiences with our work, but there are other experiences. There are, of course, experiences where people feel that a work brings up something that they didn't want to remember, or they didn't want to think about. It triggers them in some way. And I was thinking a lot about that from a couple of personal experiences and other things. And so a lot of those ideas started to swirl around and come together in the idea of this artist who creates installations where people have had transformative experiences. And some of that, like I said, comes from my own experience as someone who goes to installations or to art and has had experiences like this with art.
So I think another thing you talked about is in terms of negative experiences, like when something very negative happens and that doesn't necessarily correlate to the artist's intention, where does that leave everyone who's involved, kind of thing? Was that part of it as well?
That was definitely part of it. That was one of the central questions I had going into the book. And I don't know if I have an answer even personally for it. It was something I tried to engage with as fully as possible within the story of the book. But I don't know. It's a weird thing to make stuff and put it out in the world without knowing how people are going to respond to it. I mean, that's why we do it, of course. But there is always that risk that somebody could have a bad experience with it, or it could, like we said, it could trigger a bad experience. And I don't know what the responsibility of the artist is, but that was definitely one of the main questions that animated the beginning of the book. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's my thoughts about the book, and there's my thoughts about intentionality. But so as just one reader of your book, Scott, I feel like it's not only about intentionality, but also about the vulnerability of people who have recently experienced loss or trauma, and how they may fall sway to the influences of powerful people or experiences in ways that might be more extreme than under other circumstances. So you have several characters in your book that experience loss at different periods of their life, and they just feel really raw, and very much influenced by external forces. So for instance, the charismatic, almost cult figure who holds sway over people just by the melodious quality of his voice, to me was like, how can he have this power over these people? How is that possible? But when you are vulnerable, perhaps that happens more readily.
I think so. And I think all the research I did on not just cults, but any kind of, group that it forms around some kind of extreme belief or extreme experience, that was a common refrain was, I was not interested in this at all until I was having basically the worst day of my life. And then somebody knocked at my door, or I heard somebody speak. Um, and I was vulnerable or receptive to that. And so I was interested in that because I think that there's a very kind of direct connection with the experiences we sometimes have with art. You know, you go to see something, you go to see an exhibit, or you listen to a piece of music, or you watch a film, and it has zero effect on you. And you could watch it or see it at a different time in your life, and it could change the way you look at things or change the way you think about things. And it all has to do with where you are at that particular moment in time. So that was definitely something that I wanted to explore in the book. And it kind of gets me to how we met, or how I think first encountered your work, because so I first saw Carol's work at a botanical garden in Los Angeles called Descanso Gardens, which is a space that I was very familiar with, or thought I was very familiar with. And my family, we had spent a lot of time there over the years. Even there was a period where I would go there really early in the morning to write. So it was a space I felt I knew. And that was one of the pleasures of going to Descanso, was it was familiar. We knew the trails, we knew, what in some ways what we were going to see, although there were always surprises. And last year, the end of last year, I was really hunkered down trying to finish the book. I had about a 5 or 6 month period of really intensive, everyday, full-time revision on the book, because it needed to be done by the end of the year. And I might have my chronology off a little bit here, but I think it's close. I believe I finished the book on a Friday toward the end of the year. And then we went to see Carol's work at Descanso that weekend. And so when I showed up at the botanical garden, I was basically just a raw nerve. I mean, there was just, I was completely spent emotionally and physically after finishing this sprint at the end of the book. And I hadn't yet jumped into the second guessing phase of what have I done and is it terrible, which would start probably Monday morning. So there was that weekend of just being open to whatever. And we went to see your work there, and I want to ask you about it more specifically in a minute. But it really affected me, both because I think of what I brought to it, right, where I was coming from that weekend, but also because it showed me the space in a different way. So I found it beautiful, but I also found it kind of upsetting, in that this was a place I felt I knew. And then there was another person saying, well, sure, but what if you looked over here? Or what if you saw it this way? And that friction that I felt, that internal friction, was pretty much exactly what I was trying to get at in the previous 4 years of writing the book. So the fact that it then happened that weekend felt very fitting. So would you talk a little bit about maybe your work overall, and then the Descanso work in particular?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give the brief synopsis. So I am a media artist and I work in a lot of different forms. But I'd say one primary area that has proven to be an area of fascination for me is working with video projection in a way where it's not about the cinematic movie screen or about the very screen that you're all looking at now on your computers, but using video projection out in physical space, using a plethora of different kinds of materials and exploring the physics of it, the optical play of light and projected image onto these different materials. So just prior to Descanso, I had turned my projectors onto landscape and letting Mother Nature work out all the complication and the building, and figuring out a way to collaborate with the complexity of these surfaces in a way that produces yet another world, both rooted in the natural landscape and yet taken to this other space. So I've collected just a half dozen images that I can show you. So it's not an abstract description. So let me share screen. And we'll go here. Can everyone see that okay? Okay, so this is just a sampling of some of the projecting I would do at night. So I felt like the luckiest artist in the world that Descanso created this residency for me. So at night, after the gardens closed, I would be left in the garden to project onto the trees there. And sometimes I was joined by friends, dancers, movers who worked with me in the projections. And other times I mounted these large scale multimedia performances with live music, live dance, recitation of poems, to experience the gardens in a different way, as Scott said. And the fact that it was happening at nighttime too made it all the more magical. And a lot of people who were involved in these experiences are actually in the Zoom grid now. So we might be able to introduce some of them. Okay, so now stop share.
One thing I think about with that that work was there was a very small room inside one of the buildings where you can describe it much better than I can, but there was a kind of a layered performance, both human and in terms of light and shadow.
Pause 1 second. There's a comment in the chat that says we're seeing presenter view. What does that mean?
I think that's just about your slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I kept sneaking back in to this room to see more of this piece over the course of the night. But what strikes me now, of course, is that that room was probably what, 50 square feet in terms of where people could stand and watch. It was pretty small, maybe 100, and there were like 50 people packed in there at any given moment, which now seems insane based on our current situation. But it was one of the last times I was probably packed into a small space with a lot of non-masked people. But but so after, oh, go ahead.
So timing wise, so a year later, Scott gets in touch with me. I didn't know Scott. And so he's a year out from having finished a very long-term project. I'm about a year out after finishing an 18-month project. So we're both in a very interesting time where it's not immediately after, where you're kind of in a state of trauma or, you know, trying to go, what was that? Oh my God, you know, you probably had some time to start replenishing, and you have a little more distance on your project that you might be able to reflect upon it more objectively. And so I see Scott, much like you see him now, with this collection of Post-its on the ceiling that to me looked like this colorful fish scales, which also happened to be the organizational final outline of the form that the book ultimately took. And he brings up this idea of collaborating. So I said, okay, and wrote this very insightful note about the Descanso show and everything. I said, okay, let me read your book and let's see where we can go with it. So you read the book, and I'll say the thing that grabbed me quite obviously is that I found that his description of the artist's work seemed very credible to me. Like I could picture those works, even though they're not works that have ever existed for real, except for in Scott's mind. But I think everyone here present today has seen really poor renditions of artists on movies or whatever. So I was so relieved that it's like, okay, this artist is believable. And then I said, okay, let's meet on Zoom. And so we meet on Zoom and I see him with all his Post-its, and we have I don't know, Scott, did we talk for a couple hours the first time or something?
It was probably a while. Yeah.
So it became clear to me that Scott's a ruminator. You know, we just were able to like have this meandering conversation where one thing leads to another and go, oh, that makes me think of this and that makes me think of that. And so for me, that was enough to know that we could do something, you know, because I was like, okay, we can engage on that level. And that to me is exactly where a collaboration is germinates. When you can start hitting upon things that shine a little more, and then you start collecting those shiny moments, and then it starts to coalesce. So, and I'd say each conversation was like that, very freewheeling and generative. So I'll pass it to you, Scott.
Well, and we were talking about a lot of things, but I think the thing we homed in on was the idea of memory, which was something we were both, I think, considering before we started talking in some ways. And there was something that you had said early on about, since the pandemic, because people were spending so much time at home and working from home and doing everything from home, that we were possibly engaging with memory more than we did in other times, and that felt very true.
But even before that, okay. So at one, I'm sorry, you jogged my memory. So, Scott mentions that at one point the book was 100 pages longer than it ended up being. You know, so I was really curious about the 100 pages that got cut, and then he mentioned that he stores all of his previous drafts of his book, like tomes of paper, which you'll see in the video, in tote bags in his shed. And like, oh my God, that's fabulous. Like, to me, the idea of these previous drafts held on to was like, it's like preserving the paths not chosen. You know, the drafts you decided that weren't going to become the book, you hold on to in case they could become something else,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Well, and there was certain, because we were talking about the Post-its at one point, and I think that's where Emily came up, because I was pointing out certain Post-its, and what you're referring to was that at one point in the process of writing the book, there was a character named Emily who played a pretty significant role in the story, and she probably factored into 100 or so pages of the book. And during the last-ish stages of revision, especially with my editor, Dan Smetanka, and some other readers who had helped me out with their thoughts, I decided to go a different way in the story. And that meant she had to go away. So not only did the character disappear from the narrative, you will not see her in the book if you read the book, but in some ways, all of my time I had spent with this fictional character and all the time I had spent working on it kind of disappeared as well. And the thing that kept coming back and was so interesting was that when I was revising the book without her, I would have moments where I would think, well, I can't do this because how does that square with this Emily section? And then I'd remember, oh, she doesn't exist anymore. And then when you and I, Carol, were talking about parts of the book that had gone, I kept thinking about the book with her in it. And I had to keep reminding myself that she's not there. And so there was something about like a forced amnesia, or, I mean, grief is too strong a word to use, I think, for a fictional character, but there's something in that ballpark of just having this entity in your life for a year, 2 years, and then having to say, nope, no more. We're going to have no more communication. And I think that was something that really jumped out to you, and that became one of the initial sparks for this piece that we're going to show in a few minutes.
Yeah, Emily was calling. And the fact that Emily as a character is also a writer. So I really love the layering of Scott as writer, edits Emily, Emily makes her voice known out of these tote bags, that she still wants to exist in some shape or form. And then she's a writer who struggles with writing. And so, so I think that makes me think also of a lot of our conversations together had to do with process, and how each of us works and how you move on to the next kind of thing. So, so the piece that we did is very much about not only the process of Scott and I finding what we can make a piece about, but how you keep doing what you do and what moves you forward, kind of thing, I think is also part of it. And then if I could just mention the other part with the participants. So Scott, Emily is writer. And then I decided what I wanted to do is, and it's something that I have done frequently in the past, is to cast out a net to people that I know, to ask for their participation. And so I put together just this little call that said, send me some video. It can just be phone footage, that would be fine, of some kind of action that you do in your everyday that is inextricably linked to the memory of somebody. And how by doing that action, that's how you revisit the person, you know? And so, so another thing we had talked about a lot, I'm sorry, we had a lot of long conversations and it's all coming back to me, but anyway, is the concept of a memory palace as a memoir. So like this idea of, you know, imagining rooms and you store memories in each of them and that helps you remember. Well, I love the idea that a memory palace could actually not be architecture at all, but it could be the everyday motions that you move through in the day. So it's not a photo album. It's not this construct. It's really just living your life from day to day that gets embedded with all these memories. Isn't that a fabulous way to carry them around with you?
Mm.
So,
and I think, like you had said at one point, that our own memory palaces may not be exclusive to our memories. That, you know, what if there are other, you know, we live in community, and so we live with other people's memories as well. And I think that was something that we tried to get into the piece.
yeah. So the video turned out to be kind of a interwoven human narrative, where it's not a linear, you know, illustration at any point. It's almost like hearing multiple voices, multiple connections at once. And oh, I thought this would be an opportune time to also introduce Paul Chavez into the picture. Paul, I don't know if you're here. You can.
I'm here.
Yay! He's a fabulous sound designer who added the soundscape to this video. And when I've worked with Paul on many a project, live performance as well as installation and video, and something I think that we share in common. You just meet certain people along the way who are in your same pocket, and so it doesn't take as much work to work together, but also he has a lot of sound corollaries to my visuals. So I love intricate, layered, detailed things that I'm fine tuning, and you know, it's all about just getting it just right, you know. And he does the exact same thing with his sounds, which I think you'll see. Paul, I don't know if you wish to make any comment, but
No, I mean, you describe it well. I'll just say the one thing is that when I first saw your work, I had that relational kind of experience, like, oh my God, this is the visualization of what of what I make and what I hear. So, yeah. Yeah. And the exploration of memory, I think, was exciting here on this piece too.
So we're going to show an excerpt. Is it time, Scott, to show an excerpt?
Yeah, let's show it.
Okay, so we're going to show just like the first, I don't know, 9 minutes or so. And I do want to mention that because there are quite a few people who participated in this, that much of the action memories do occur in the latter half. So we are going to provide the link, the Vimeo link to the video so that people can watch the whole piece at their leisure. And then the last thing I'll say is during the pandemic, I had to figure out how to work. And so I moved from working in these mammoth, landscapes and big trees to this tiny space beneath my kitchen table. And so I've been making installations there since March. And so everything has become highly compressed, but I'm happy to discover that I can still create worlds unto themselves in this tiny space and have people converge, like Scott join me in there and Paul join me in there and create these things.
Not
So
physically, that would be weird if we were all on video.
yeah,
Virtually.
yeah. Okay, so let me cue up the video and share with everybody. So I'm going to share. How do I mute myself here and mute?
Oh yeah, that's something that happened. I remember that. Whereas when I look at the Emily sections, I go, "Oh, that's right. Totally forgot about that moment," because I had to forget about it in order to rewrite the book. And so it's almost like forced amnesia. By the time I cut her parts, I had about a year's left of work on the book. So for that year, I really had to pretend that the last 10 months of my life hadn't happened. And I didn't have enough time. I didn't have time to process that. It was really just, okay, that goes away, get back to work on this thing, because I had a deadline and the publishing schedule was starting. So I knew I had to finish the book. So there wasn't, it sounds weird to say like a mourning period over a person that didn't ever exist, but something like that, of going, oh yeah, that was a big chunk of my year working on this thing that now I have to pretend didn't happen. Because every time I would let it back into my brain, it would influence what I was trying to do in a weird way. That wasn't a way that wasn't conducive. It's like, well, what about Emily? Oh wait, there is no Emily. And so the last week or so going back to it has been both a little jarring, but also really nice. It's been nice to revisit that story and that language. And it was a piece of writing I really liked, which doesn't make it good or bad. It just means that I really liked working on it. And it had kind of a different feel that I liked, which is maybe why it didn't work for the book.
I'm sorry, it's missing Paul's sound on this one. I'm sorry, let me go. Paul, I'm sorry. I pulled up the wrong movie. Okay. So on memory.
So I'll go ahead and jump in and I wanted to ask Scott O'Connor while you're looking for the video.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh,
Okay.
see. Wait.
I wanted to ask you, how did you?
Okay, got it.
Did you find it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
If I share, can you see this window or do I have to do a new share?
Yeah.
You can? You can see it?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Let me just double check. Yes, okay. Oh my God, Paul, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go again. Take two.
You can maybe forward it just a little bit, Carol, past the talking.
You're self-conscious.
That was a big chunk of my year working on this thing that now.
No, because Paul has sound there too.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
that's something that happened. I remember that. Whereas when I look at the Emily sections, I go, oh, that's right. I totally forgot about that moment, because I had to forget about it in order to rewrite the book.
And so there's, yeah, it's almost like forced amnesia. By the time I cut her parts, I had about a year's left of work on the book. So for that year, I really had to pretend that the last 10 months of my life hadn't happened. And I didn't have enough time. I didn't have time to process that. It was really just, okay, that goes away, get back to work on this thing, because I had a deadline and the publishing schedule was starting. So I knew I had to finish the book. So there wasn't, it sounds weird to say like a mourning period over a person that didn't ever exist, but something like that, of going, oh yeah, that was a big chunk of my year working on this thing that now I have to pretend didn't happen. Because every time I would let it back into my brain, it would influence what I was trying to do in a weird way. That wasn't a way that wasn't conducive. You know, it's like, well, what about Emily? Oh wait, there is no Emily. And so the last week or so going back to it has been both a little jarring, but also really nice. It's been nice to revisit that story and that language. And it was a piece of writing I really liked, which doesn't make it good or bad. It just means that I really liked working on it. And it had kind of a different feel that I liked, which is maybe why it didn't work for the book.
afraid of being forgotten or erased or simply disappearing. The world feels so crowded that I don't believe there could be room for all of us here. The space we take up. I don't mean physically. I mean thoughts of us, memories, our own and those of others about us. My husband, our daughter, people I've loved and who I think have loved me, at least at one time. Cecilia and I walk by a small cemetery every morning on our way to her preschool. Each time, coming and going, I count the headstones compulsively. 16 rows of 12 stones, 2 rows of 14. I think of that number, 220, which I can imagine could also be the number of people I've known over time. Family, friends, boyfriends, co-workers, acquaintances. But I can't recall them all in full. What I recall is a single moment, or sound, or gesture. Their entire life for me is distilled to the way they raised a glass with their voice, or ran a hand through their hair. I haven't written anything in a very long time. The last poem I remember starting was on the day we moved into the house. Will had gone to work and I was unpacking boxes in the bedroom when I was struck by a memory of my mother doing the opposite, tossing clothes and shoes into a suitcase one afternoon, one of the many times she threatened to leave. My father stood in their bedroom doorway holding a glass of scotch, his tie loosened, watching, bored with the performance. I was 8 or 9 at the time, out on the front lawn, reading. I looked in through my parents' window and saw the scene playing out like something on TV. Drama in a frame behind glass. I found my notebook in one of the moving boxes and attempted to give some shape to the memory. But after a few stumbling fragments of lines, I stopped. It felt that by writing about it, I was dragging that conflict, all of those conflicts, into this new home. That if I gave voice to them here, they would live here. I set the notebook aside and haven't touched it since. My mother's suitcase, bright red, her lipstick, bright red, her anger shoving clothes inside it as if feeding. When I leave a room or a life, what of me remains? When I leave a room or a life, what of me remains? Will says, you are not forgetting things, but I know better. Words for things, names. Asparagus is something I used to know the name of, but last night during dinner I needed to reach, grasping, coming away empty-handed. I finally had to look it up online. What are you doing, he says, but I just shake my head. I don't want to start a fight. Over the years, it's been a source of conflict, my willingness to succumb to injury, real or imagined. These slippings feel like little seizures, black gaps opening. I'm too young for this, I say, and he says, that's why it's not happening. It's all in your head. Yes, I think it is.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna stop there.
I should also thank my wife who did Emily's voiceover.
Yes, Karen.
And thanks to Paul. Yeah, the sound really, I love those sounds that when I don't know what it is until then I see it later, you know, the digging and later in the video, there's a number of moments like that where the sound memory happens and you place it before you see it. So should we see if there are any questions, Jennifer?
Sure. So before I forget, I did get a question emailed to me from Dick McPherson, who has a question for you, Scott. Says, your use of time in ZZ is central to moving the story and also revealing to characters that, quote, time itself also feels like a character. Could you comment on the extent to which in your work time causes things to happen or passively waits with the reader to see what will happen? Full disclosure, I've only read the first 60 pages so far. Thanks, Dick McPherson.
Well, he hasn't gotten to the part where they find the time machine and they go back in time. I think about that a lot, and I think this was the first book where I really engaged with it to a pretty large extent, in that I wanted it to feel like these characters were living in multiple time periods at the same time, because I think we all do that to some extent. I think we do live obviously in the present, but we also anticipate the future and we think about the past, and those things get blurry and they influence one another. And so that was something that I thought about a lot and worked on a lot with the structure of this novel, and when scenes happened and how they affected scenes before and after them in different time periods. And that was the reason for the multicolored Post-its, was to try to keep it straight. But that was very much something I was trying to explore, and that these are all characters who are stuck in their memories in some ways. They can't get out. They're prisoners of past events.
Okay, so here is another question from Anne Dunn. She asks, do the cut characters live forever in the bags, or do they ever reappear in other stories?
Or videos.
Yeah, now they're in videos. They almost never reappear. This has been a real fun and exciting experience because Emily got to come out of the bag. But for the most part, they don't. It's certainly not in that form. You know, sometimes, like I had said at the beginning there, the idea of an artist, it was something that carried over from my previous novel. So there are kind of echoes of things, of characters, but I don't think I've ever used a character that I cut in something else. It's a pretty inefficient art form. You end up writing a lot more than you use, and then you have bags in your shed.
Are there any more questions from the audience? If you type them in the chat, I'll ask them.
Or you can feel free to turn on your cameras at this point, right? Or
Oh, sure. Everyone, if you want to ask a question, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
it'd be great to see everyone. Eleanor, hello.
Okay.
John, hello.
Here's another question.
Aaron.
This is from Corinne Marquette. Do you have any other particular rituals for when you finish writing a book?
Usually just existential anxiety for a while. No, and that's why this was such a nice experience, to be able to work with someone else and talk about what we were both working on and where those things could meet and could create something new. So no, the publishing process is such a weird thing, at least from a writer's perspective, because you'll finish a book, but it won't actually appear in the world for oftentimes a year or a year and a half after. So there's this strange liminal period where, at least for me, I'm always wondering what I should be doing. And so having an opportunity to work with Carol has been great.
So Carol, there's a question from Regine to you. What about you, Carol? Do you have any feelings or rituals that you do after you complete a piece?
I think when I complete a large project, I'm feeling very much the need for an influx of nourishment in every way, every meaning of the word. So I'll read a lot. I just want other people's work and experiences to enter me. In terms of going from one smaller project to another, I'm always doing something. And I love process, and I love just messing with things and having them inspire me to move to the next step. So it's kind of a continuous process.
Yeah, I share that part about just feeling that hunger for other people's work. I think sometimes when we get really locked into our own work, I know that I don't read certainly as much fiction when I'm writing fiction, and so when I finish something, yeah, exactly, Carol. There's that sense of like, what have I missed? You know, what haven't I engaged with out there?
So Andrea Woloski has a question. Are there any particular writers that really inspire you on this novel for Scott?
Oh, yeah, so many. I'll try to think quickly. There were a couple books that I kept on my desk or nearby that had inspired me, and when I read them, and I just liked having them around. One is called Blue Territory by Robin Lippincott. It's a book about Joan Mitchell, the painter Joan Mitchell, which I found to be wonderful and challenging and strange in all the best ways. And the other one was Sweet for Barbara Loden by Natalie Legere, which is a book about Barbara Loden's movie Wanda. And it's about Loden, and it's about the real woman who inspired Wanda, and it's about Legere and her mother. And it's a book, to me anyways, about the messiness of how our own experiences in a work of art get all tangled up in good ways and not so good ways. And I just felt like she articulated that beautifully in that book. So those were two of many that I returned to and I just liked having around.
Are there any more questions from the audience? So there is a Vimeo. We've shared a Vimeo. Scott shared it at the very beginning of the chat. So if you want to check out more of Carol Kim's work, it's right here at the very beginning of the chat. So you can, cut and paste that link and be able to see more of her work. The password is here as well. You're going to need that. So
I would love it if anyone could finish watching the whole video and hearing what you might think. It's a bit of an outlier piece for me, and just how much concrete human narrative is included. And it's fresh off the press, so helping to digest that would be great.
Okay, we have a request to repost that. So let me see if I can do that.
Oh, sure. I can do it here. I've got it.
Okay, great.
That's funny what Carol was saying about how the narrative aspects of this video are a little, different for her, because I felt almost the opposite. And there was a moment where we were talking with Paul that I think I even said I had sort of nothing more to offer because my instincts are narrative. And whenever I would see the work in progress, I wanted to like figure out what the story was or how we were going to shape it. But I knew that wasn't what was going on. And so it was a lesson to me in just like sitting back and allowing, other artists to do their work. And so that was really great. But yeah, those are my instincts for sure.
So we do have a question from Regine, who is asking, she says, I would love to know more about your collaboration, but fail to provide a clear question. So I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a little bit more about maybe the process, the collaboration process, and how, well, I'm curious, maybe you explained it earlier when I was distracted, but how did you decide, Scott and Carol, to work together in the first place around your book?
It's Scott's fault.
I sent Carol a fan letter and she responded to it. I mean, most of it, Carol, what do you think? Most of it came out of conversations. We would have these very long and I think interesting conversations about all sorts of things, but they did focus more on memory and on, things left behind and things. And then Carol brought up that idea of physical memory and how some of the everyday things we do are often tied to people we've loved or people we've known, and just how the memory resides in the body as well. But in terms of the nuts and bolts collaboration, Carol, what do you think? Well, we're kind of getting stuff from all over the place.
You just conversation after conversation. And we had a shared Google Doc that we poured images in and text fragments. And so it's all this kind of germination process. And then there was a distinct conversation we had where Scott gained clarity around the Emily character, and I could picture the installation. As soon as I could picture it, it's just a matter of making it in a way. But it's like this, mystery. You're not sure what it's going to be. You're comfortable with that. And then maybe you're not comfortable with that. And then, the deadline is approaching. You're feeling a little less comfortable with that. And then boom, it clicks. And then you know where it's going. And then it becomes something. And you're like, okay, there it is. We made something. So
Carol, you should maybe talk a little bit about the memory pieces that you gathered and how you processed, or how you thought about and applied those pieces. Because for me on the audio side, a lot of the audio comes from those pieces that were contributed by those memory pieces, and I loved including them because I love these strange moments of weird sounds that punctuate the work.
yeah, I think actually in terms of leading to future work, there might be a way of expanding upon this, because the human narrative that came from these, okay, so I wanted it to be kind of immediate in terms of someone doing, not have someone dwell over it, like, oh my God, okay, a memory action, what does she mean by that? And so to keep it humble and to keep it as you bump into them in your actual life kind of thing. But then all these stories, I mean, in the video, there's like 3 stories that we include that Emily's typing, but there's these beautiful snippets, like, when I make Nanny's cornbread, sometimes I can feel her in the way my hands move. The black cast iron skillet I use was hers, so just these little stories are so wonderful, that I feel like I could do my own story core, like everyone contribute your memory action or something, it makes you, it kind of makes you appreciate what you think is just the banal day to day. And you actually find that it's imbued with all this richness that connects you to people living and no longer living, but folded in. And that's what I kind of live for, is how it's all there in the everyday, and it's not something that is something you have to work so hard to access,
Yeah, I love the video of making the bed, the person making the bed. That's such a simple physical action that we all do, or we should do every day.
Yeah.
And you learned it from somebody,
Yeah. I don't think I answered your question, Paul, about the concrete sounds, but
No, I mean, and what you did describe perfectly, like that it's all there in some ways. What's been challenging about your prompt is to be present about what you do, and to think about like where that comes from, right? And I think that's what in part of what this piece is about, is understanding that what you do is embedded with all of this history, yeah.
I mean, I will say that it's been interesting for me I think about memory a lot, because I don't consider myself to have a very good memory. Like my partner jokes about how I just really live in the now, and I'm not good with the past, and I'm not good with planning, and I have no sense of time, whereas he is much better at remembering things and planning for the future. So when you have that tenuous relationship to memory, it's it's kind of interesting to unpack for different people how it works, it's just quirky as all heck, and really individualized, yeah.
Well, and so this work was also done underneath your kitchen table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So they're layered windows that I had painted these white sort of washes on that mimicked the number of Post-its that Scott was using.
And then you projected the video onto the.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was something that really struck me too. It's a very analog process for as much digital media as there is involved. It wasn't assembled digitally, it was assembled in a very analog way.
Great. Well, are there any more questions from the audience? And Scott did post the Vimeo link again with the password on Memory for Emily, so that everyone can watch the full video at their leisure. Well, this is the end, I guess. It's been an hour. So if everyone could turn off their videos and just, so that the author and the artist can see you and say hi.
Oh, turn on your
Thank
video.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
being
you.
here. I want to have a party now.
So,
Where's the champagne, Scott?
Still early here on the West Coast, so. But
Well,
thanks everyone for coming out. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us today.
yeah, thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thanks, everyone. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Great. Bye-bye.
Hope to see you all in some other virtual space soon.
Go vote.
Yeah, right.
Have a good Sunday. Bye.
Bye.